Hey, it's your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. I want to discuss with you some of the cognitive symptoms of the borderline female. The borderline is a personality disorder which is really characterized by a lot of stormy relationships, the expression of a lot of what they call mood lability or mood instability in the woman. She can be very highly functioning, meaning, having a lot of energy, hold down a job, be involved in a lot of activities, a lot of groups, carry on a lot of responsibilities. I mean, it's not like, can they, have plates in the air? It's like, how many plates can they constantly have going in the air? They generally, will book their calendars very tightly, have a lot of obligations to people, and tend to over obligate to people. Prone to, they have a comorbidity or, sometimes a dual diagnosis with these types of people. They might be diagnosed or they might be undiagnosed. I mean, a lot of people with these personality disorders such as psychopathy, narcissistic, whether it's covert or overt, or the borderline, they generally do not feel like they have anything wrong with them. They see nothing wrong. They're very strongly opinionated and feel very correct and, just proper with where they're coming from in their opinions. They're very rigid and inflexible in terms of, them being able to manage, different states. They get upset easily. So it's kind of like this mental inflexibility that I would say is kind of a real hallmark of a borderline versus a narcissist. They're very rigid, meaning they don't adapt easily, to change, especially like if you, do certain things that are upsetting to them, whether it's you're bringing a certain item over or, you have a different pace of life than them, or if you're running late, or if you're not prepared for something. They are not very easygoing at all. They get very upset. They're very, what they would call inflexible or very rigid kind of in their mental structure. And so this can make a borderline female extremely hard to, difficult to deal with. I mean, they're very highly structured. And the reason why they plug in so many of these different things into their schedule is they do not feel comfortable being alone. They are, for whatever cause, whether they were, had a trauma in their childhood, a lot of psychologists feel that is kind of the, along with maybe some genetic components, but that could be some of the issues that create the borderline scenario in the female, it can have a genetic propensity. It can also have an environmental propensity where if there was trauma, abuse, be it physical, emotional, sexual, or perceived abuse, it can set off those sort of borderline personality disorders in young adulthood and then emerge even stronger as they get into their adulthood and older adulthood. So that mental rigidity or inflexibility is definitely, I would say, a hallmark that is known about the borderline female. And so it's like people in their environment are forced to be very on time, very scheduled with them. They like a lot of that order, and even though being organized is good and being punctual is a strength, these people get upset very easily and will hurt other people and really be very kind of combative and confrontational if you kind of disrupt what is their order. And I think what is so harmful is that they pursue order to the imbalance of all else. They pursue this rigidity to the lack of all else. And some of the more sentient aspects of life, like being patient, like being caring, like being concerned, what's wrong with you, kind of that nurturing side, or like a little bit of that softer side, I would say maybe has a tougher time being expressed in the borderline. I think that they very much do not develop in that direction, maybe because of that fear of abandonment, that if they get too attached to somebody or something, that, you know, it'll be so hurtful, it'll be so difficult for them to move on and like let them go, that that they, you know, have a very sort of you know, firm grasp on their own like racket of their life. I mean, they're very into like controlling things and managing things and like being the matriarch of the family or the relationship. And, you know, they get very upset with others if, you know, they're not like on point, where it's like, you know, you didn't get the batteries for this, or you didn't get this and this ready, or, you know, why don't you have this right now? I mean, so they're very, you know, they'll react with a lot of hostility to people who are really of most meaning to them. So it's very confusing and very disruptive to people who are in a relationship with them, because it's like, unless they totally get them and they totally accept them and they're like, well, that's just their personality, and that they go through these spasms. But, you know, generally it's very confusing because they lash out at the people who they care most about. And so it's like, you know, you've heard this statement where, you know, they don't you know, show love very, you know, like people generally do. I mean, you know, oftentimes I don't think that they're really super big huggers, you know, super affectionate. You know, they might feel like they love you, but I think they're very uncomfortable like feeling the depth of emotions for people, because they're so terrorized underneath of this abandonment or this feeling of abandonment. And if you yourself have been diagnosed with borderline, you know, and if you want to kind of like testify to that feeling or kind of like validate it, you can certainly do that in the comment section below. But that has been my observation and knowledge with this population. You know, especially they tend to kind of like, you know, sometimes you hear people who are visionaries. Well, these people kind of have like illusions of the way certain things should be. So they're constantly like on the up and up, where they're constantly trying to protect and create this sort of illusion in their life, which is, you know, I think it's like a constant challenge for them and a constant requirement that they're constantly creating this illusion. And if anything should falter, you know, the plants don't get watered, and you know, and then they'll be so angry because they try so hard to keep all this so nice and so neat, and they just work tirelessly at this, yet they don't have time for people. Like they can't, it's very difficult for them to, I think, connect to people and relationships. So it's almost like relationships take a back seat to everything else that they have in their life. And again, if you are borderline or have experienced one, I'd be interested in your feedback on that. You know, because they do tend to treat other people with, I would say, a depersonalization, where again, it's their emotional centers in their brain which aren't, you know, processing along quote unquote normal pathways that cause there to be like a jump of, you know, their processing in their brain. So rather than it being like an organic, you know, smooth loop, it's like their processing fires off in kind of a disordered, irrational manner, which causes them to, you know, kind of like spike in their behavior, and then, you know, it'll kind of subdue, and then, you know, they'll feel bad, but like they don't feel that bad. You know, they won't like, you know, I'm really sorry, that must have hurt you that I said this, it must have hurt you that I've treated you this way. You know, they tend to really alienate, I would say, a lot of people, so they don't ever have that open communication channel to be able to say, you know, man, that was really hurtful, you know, like, you know, in other words, it's hard to have like a two-way conversation with these people. They're just, sometimes it's like I think they really almost, they don't have the time, or at least they present the illusion that they don't have time. And so I think that creates a lot of the storminess in relationships with them. And, you know, I think that they will, you know, kind of have these overly negative visions of things. Like the people who always say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I mean, I think the borderline lives in like the worst case scenario situation 24/7. It's like they're constantly worried about that worst case scenario. And so I think they often like have a comorbidity or a coexistence of a lot of anxiety and also depression and emptiness. So whereas the narcissist, you know, they're kind of like building their supply, and you know, they're kind of like moving around through their sources. The borderline is like such a fear of abandonment that they will have supply, or you know, they'll develop some relationships, but they're so afraid of losing them that they almost alienate almost everybody, you know, in certain respects. There's certain groups that they'll they'll have a lot of groups who they kind of will have in their life, be it a church group, a bridge group, a social activity, a cocktail group, a gourmet food group, like a sports group, or people who they get together with, and it's kind of glossary and the extent in depth of which maybe they know these people. But they might take a lot of trips or do a lot of extended activities with these, and it really helps set off their boredom and their fear of being alone. But the thing is, though, they do engage in kind of that splitting where they'll kind of be condescending or devaluing of the very source which they idealize. So they do that in the same breath, rather than just having like kind of a even keel sort of feeling about people. They'll kind of really fluctuate and be very stormy. So if you see some of these issues going along, and it's the borderline who you're feeling is in your life, I guess it's right to have mercy on them, but just, sometimes it's very sad, because if it's a family member or someone who you've, maybe met at a certain part of your life, and, you had grown into a relationship with them, you've experienced the brunt of a lot of this hostility. It's very painful to go through, and also there's not a lot of outlet and recourse to go through and develop and communicate with these people. So I really feel for you. Hope this gives you some perspective, and we'll be going into some more exploration of this in future videos. Peace and harmony with you here today. I hope these videos help. Please share, please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussions, and support.